I would say I believed the legal system was there for justice. Before the trial, I knew it wasn't, but still, I wanted to give our all. We don't know what God's plan is with this trial. Afterward, I know very few people can say they know this thing is corrupt and it's part of the beast system, but I know that now. We are the enemy.
You are listening to the 5 a.m. podcast, and today is your day. Welcome back to the 5 a.m. podcast. The journey of life often brings those unexpected turns. However, true leadership and transformation are created in the response to our darkest moments. Today, we're joined by a father who faced every parent's worst nightmare and yet chose to turn the painful grief into a beacon of protection for others. Scott Schara is the father of Grace, a delightful 19-year-old young woman with Down syndrome who passed away in a Wisconsin hospital. Out of that devastating loss, Scott and his family did not retreat. Instead, they transformed. They launched Our Amazing Grace, a ministry and resource hub dedicated to honoring Grace's legacy and protecting vulnerable families. Scott is also the author of the new book, Is the Government Legally Killing Us?, which recently hit #1 on Amazon. Today, we aren't just talking about a tragedy, we're talking about triumph over pain, the enduring power of a father's love, and how one family is transforming grief into a legacy of hope and awareness. Scott, it's a pleasure to welcome you to the 5 a.m. podcast.
Well, the pleasure's mine, and thanks for that very kind introduction.
Thank you. Scott, we want to start with who this journey is named after. When you close your eyes and you think of your lovely daughter, Grace, what would be that first memory or quality of her that brings a smile to your face?
Yeah, that's a great question. Her unconditional love. She did not have what we have, which is, we make our love based on performance, and she did not do that. So that's an easy answer. So, things that kind of percolate from that where she called me earthly dad. She called my wife and her mom earthly mom. We didn't teach her that. God taught her that. It was interesting to see what having somebody like Grace in your life was like. She was a literal angel. She was a gift. And if I had an opportunity to have another child, I would want one with Down syndrome. That's how much of a gift she was. Toward the end, as I realized how, when I say toward the end, it happened to be the end of her life, but I didn't know she was going to die. But the last couple of years, when I would see how she would approach things, and the freedom that she had and the rest that she had, I thought to myself, I wish I had Down syndrome, because we as much as we're supposed to be in the world but not of the world, we get tied into this world, and that is not what she was tied into. And it was really neat to watch.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for that answer. Grace, as you mentioned, did have Down syndrome, and those who knew her also, I guess, described her as a pure reflection of joy. How did having Grace in your lives shape your family's understanding, rather, of unconditional love before any of this testing began?
Yeah, I'll give you an example because it's the best way to do it. And I shared this example in the book because it is on point. And there's a lot of other examples I could share, but this one was so good because we would go to the annual county fair every year. And of course, as the dad, I got tagged with riding all the rides with Grace.
Yes.
And those are not necessarily fun rides. A lot of them, they're not made for a 60-year-old dad. And so, after a ride, I'd have to sit on the bench and, get my stomach to be matched up with my body for, 20 minutes before the next ride. And during one of those times on the bench, a gentleman walked into the fairgrounds. And Grace ran up to him and gave him a hug. So Grace was standing with Cindy, my wife, and Grace's mom, roughly 30 yards in front of me. And so I'm sitting on the bench and I watched this guy come in, and she goes and runs and gives him a hug. And I sat there and I thought, I can't do that. So why? So you think, well, why couldn't you just give a guy a hug? Well, it's because I had an attitude toward him. So why did I have an attitude toward him? Well, he was the local small animal vet, and he was gay, and he married a man, and they adopted children. So, that just I can't stomach that. And so what Grace demonstrated was loving the sinner. And I was demonstrating that, the sin became the sinner. So, I mean, I had hatred towards the sinner. And, so she showed me what I was supposed to be able to do. And it's interesting. She just had that way. So anyway,
Yeah,
it just
it's a powerful
gives you an
testimony.
example.
Yes. So when a family experiences this sudden catastrophic loss, like you and your wife did, the pain can easily paralyze someone. So in those initial dark days, where did you find that strength to even take that next breath or open your eyes or the next step?
Yeah, it's interesting because you're of course in complete shock. And the next couple of days, I ended up being very sick, so sick that, so Grace died October 13th of 21. The morning of October 16th of 21, so 3 days later, I had to have my wife drive me to the hospital. I had a hard time breathing. I was admitted to the hospital with what we're going to call COVID. And that that evening, I thought was going to be my last day. I called my right-hand man. I own a business. I called him. His name is Joe. I said, Joe, I think this is it. I think this is my last day on this earth. And I called our daughter, Jessica, to let her know. And so she was so cute because Jessica, she was starting to plan for Grace's funeral and helping Cindy. And I didn't want to let Cindy know how bad I was. And so she said, Dad, what should I do? I said, just wait and see if I make it. Because if I don't, you might as well get a 2-for-1 deal
Right.
on the funeral. So anyway, I'm telling you that story for a couple of reasons, because you asked, what was it like? What got you through? Well, God has a different way of doing things. He orchestrates coincidences that are not coincidences at all. They're orchestrated long before you ever knew that they were going to be orchestrated. And roughly 20 years earlier, I had prayed the unthinkable prayer, which is do whatever you need to do to break me. And the next day I woke up, I made it, and that's where God broke me. So that was a very significant event from the perspective of if I was going to be, I had no idea I was going to become a national spokesperson for this medical murder agenda at that time. But if you're going to be a spokesperson, you can't walk around having an attitude and revenge on your heart. And so he gave me the spirit of forgiveness towards the doctor and nurse who killed Grace. Then the other thing that happened is that hospital and their staff turned me around in 24 hours. And that gave me an objective view as to how Grace was treated, because I was significantly worse than Grace. And yet that hospital turned me around in 24 hours. And they did it because they didn't follow the government mandated protocols. It was, so that allowed me to see things both from a physical perspective and a spiritual perspective objectively.
Right. Yes. So then with that, let's see those two different points of view we'll focus on that spiritual one, so core to everyone's lives, and that scripture and that faith I know are foundational in your home and your life. How did then your personal relationship with God change when you were forced to walk through this valley of the shadow of death, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was the one who prevented God from breaking me before, even though I prayed the prayer. You still have to submit to it.
Yeah.
I'm substantially less proud today than I was back then. The relying on God more. As a businessman, I'm used to planning. Today, I don't know. I do this full time, so I stopped planning. I just made a couple of general observations that I live by with becoming outspoken like this, and that is whatever door God opens, we'll walk through. And so, multiple doors have been opened. I never know what door is going to be open next. And then, I also had to make the decision early on, am I going to restrict where I speak? Because, there's some nefarious people who want you on their podcast. And
It is true.
I made the decision that my only restriction, so I decided I'll speak at the Church of Satan as long as my words are not controlled, so I get to speak my mind and my heart. So I had to make that decision. And then in general, what I do when people give me options, like you did for this podcast, you gave me, I think, 3 different options. I always pick the first one. So the reason I always pick the first one is because this is urgent. This message I'm sharing is urgent. So I always pick the first one available unless it conflicts with something else. So it's pretty simple rules, but I mean, those, I don't even remember the question, but I got off on that rabbit
That's
trail.
good. That's good. It's a good rabbit trail. And we understand that it changes how we think about life, how we value our time, like you and I were talking about before we hit that record button. Now, and even part of that is many people, they might have turned into a turtle. They pull inward when they're hurt. But you and your wife, Cindy, chose a path of public advocacy. What was that exact moment or realization where you said, we can't let Grace's story end in silence?
Shortly after I got out of the hospital, we were having a discussion about what are we going to do? And we decided to start a nonprofit. And we simply thought, okay, well, Grace got to enjoy certain things because of God's blessing. So we thought, well, we want to have this foundation be able to help other disabled people enjoy things that they wouldn't be able to do without the financial help. So that was our idea. And so we started working on that. Then we had Grace's funeral, and on November 8th, so Grace died October 13th. On November 8th, I had reviewed Grace's records and realized that she was killed from a combination of meds. And so I wrote to the hospital asking for a meeting with the doctor and the hospital CEO. And at this point, I mean, I just thought it was an accident. So I thought, well, they would want to know what I found in the records so that history doesn't repeat itself. And they wrote back to me on December 2nd. And said they're not going to meet. So I thought, well, this is strange. So then I wrote a complaint letter to the medical examining board. And I also wrote to Newsmax and Fox. And to my shock, I mean, Newsmax called me a week later and asked me to be on national TV. And so I did that. And so you're asking, what was the event? Okay, so I'm giving you kind of the lead up to the event.
That's good. I like it.
So then we were listening one morning on it was either a Saturday or Sunday morning, to a nationally syndicated radio program from Olive Tree Ministries. And she was going through this whole COVID agenda. She had a couple of guests on, the host, Jan Markell. She was going through this agenda. Then she said, before we go to break, I want to play this clip of a dad who lost his Down syndrome child. I was actually in the other room, and Cindy called me in and said, Scott, I think Jan's going to talk about Grace. And so she plays the entire Newsmax clip on the radio. And that's when we realized that we're being called into this.
Wow. Well, friends, we welcome your comments, and we like to read each one of those. Let us know your thoughts on this conversation, and maybe an experience in your life where you had to determine, were you going to retract into that shell or find a protective space, or were you going to take the tragedy and turn it into a tool for other people? And Scott, we're going to get into your book a little bit later, but while some people might be leaving some comments, can you tell us how people can find your book?
Yeah, the easiest way is to go to Grace's website. That's become a hub for Grace's story, news releases, interviews I've been on, the research. I've done thousands of hours of research. It's ouramazinggrace.net. On the front page of that website, you'll see a picture of the cover of the book. If you just click on that, it will give you 3 purchase choices: Amazon, Goodreads, and Barnes & Noble.
Nice. Good. Thank you for that. Now, Scott, you have spent years pursuing the landmark lawsuit that finally concluded this past summer. Even when that legal system didn't deliver the traditional win you had hoped for, how did that 3-week trial act as a form of victory and emotional closure for your family?
It's interesting how you're framing it, victory and emotional closure. And I can only speak for myself because Jessica and Cindy have different perspectives of the trial. For me, the trial was something we were called into. So based on my studying medical malpractice jury trials, I already knew the odds of winning were near 0%. In fact, it's some medical malpractice attorneys will say 1 in 10. On the other extreme, it's about 1 in 10,000. So, I mean, you're going up against the beast. So we had a great case, great team, extremely well prepared. The actual trial was fun. The 3 weeks was fun because I'd never been more prepared for anything in my life. And so to go through the trial, we're scoring ourselves each day. I was working with the legal team. All of that was exciting and fun. But yet the verdict came down. And even though I was shocked by the verdict, we lost 11-1. So I was shocked by the verdict, but I wasn't surprised at all because if you process, first, we're going up against the beast. And so what am I talking about? I'm framing this in terms of Revelation 13, which we have the Antichrist beast and the false prophet beast. In the Antichrist beast system, we have multiple things. We have the government, we have the public fool system, we have the medical industrial establishment, we have the legal system. All of this is the beast. So we're in their system. To win is, it's truly an anomaly. If you win, it's because they want you to win so they can show, look at our system is justice. And it's not justice. I mean, it should be properly called the injustice system. And so I knew this going in, but we had already decided to not file a lawsuit. And through God's providence, we ended up filing a lawsuit. And so we never, because of being called into it, we never had a settlement position. Most of these lawsuits settle, and then a settlement comes with a gag order. Well, I knew we couldn't settle because if I'm under a gag order, I can't tell the truth anymore, right?
Right. Yes.
But also, in order to have people see what was going on behind the curtain, the win in the lawsuit was the trial was live streamed. So that was a victory for God. It was awesome. Over 1 million people saw certain segments of the trial, so they got to see what was going on behind the curtain for the first time. People who watched it like a soap opera, they're tuning in every day. When they saw the verdict come down, they could hardly believe it because they knew we won. So the jury got it wrong. Big deal. Juries get it wrong every day. So the trial didn't bring closure at all. What it did is it cemented what I knew through personal experience. So there's a difference between what we believe and what we know. And beforehand had this understanding that the legal system was corrupt. It's part of the beast system. And then you go through it. So before Grace died, I would say I believed the legal system was there for justice. Before the trial, I knew it wasn't, but still I wanted to give our all. We don't know what God's plan is with this trial. Afterward, I know very few people can say they know this thing is corrupt and it's part of the beast system, but I know that now. And, of course, that became part of the reference point in the book so that people can understand these systems we are the enemy. We got to understand we are the enemy. We are made in God's image. Satan hates God, so consequently he hates us. And these beast systems are developed to hasten our death. We are the enemy. So you will never get justice in the legal system. In fact, if we would have won, just think about what would have happened. That win would have been paraded around by the enemy, right? To say, look at, we can get justice in the system. Well, in our particular case, we spent $1.1 million in legal fees. So, I mean, is that justice? And, the system itself, I'm from Wisconsin, as you can tell with my accent, or my lack of accent, I should say.
Yeah, that's right.
The reality is we could have only won $750,000. So just that alone through state statutes prevent you from winning because they know what it costs to take a lawsuit all the way to a jury trial. It's over $1 million. So no one's going to spend $1 million unless God calls them into doing it.
Right.
So anyway, that's a long answer to your question,
that's a great answer. It's very informative, and it helps our listeners to understand the lengths that we need to go to for truth and let's say God's justice or our view of justice. But you've mentioned the book of Revelation and that chapter 13 a couple of times. Has this experience changed the way that either you consider that book of Revelation and how it's often thought about?
Completely. Yeah. So God revealed to me in July of 22, I was studying the Holocaust. And I came across a term that I'd never heard before, which was the Hegelian dialectic.
Yes.
And then God revealed to me to not use Grace's story to expose evil. And so I thought, I wonder what is going on here. Why did he reveal this to me?
Yeah.
And most people would be familiar with Ephesians 5:11. And Ephesians 5:11 says, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. And I'm going to challenge your listeners to pull out your own Bible and see what it says. So that was in my NIV Bible, which has 450 million copies sold
Yes.
in America. And that is a deception. That Bible has been changed from the original. I'm going to just share with you.
Okay.
So now through a friend, I now own a Geneva Bible.
Nice.
And the reason I own one of those is because it predates the King James. And from my understanding, it's the one that has, would be the least influenced by corruption.
Mm-hmm.
And so now Ephesians 5:11 in this Bible says, and have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but even reprove them rather. So reprove and expose are not the same thing.
Interesting. Wow.
And so when I've been speaking out, I want to make sure that we're shedding light on evil. We're not reprove as an action, expose as words. Okay, so there has to be an action. There's always an action with rebuking or reproving evil. There's not an action with, the chicken little, the sky's falling. There's no action with that.
Right.
You're just shouting from the rooftops, the sky is falling. And so I always make sure that when I'm asked, how do we fix this? There's always an action, and that's how you reprove evil. So anyway, I did a lot of studying on this. I ended up doing a long recording before the election, the last presidential election, which was, I think I titled it, What is the Secret Purpose of the Deep State? And so just to blow your mind a little bit.
Yes.
What God revealed in this whole thing about Revelation 13. So in Revelation 13, you have the Antichrist system and the false prophet system. So this is the dialectic method that Satan uses to give us the illusion of choice. And so what the message in what is the secret purpose of the deep state was the plan to take down the satanic cabal was written by the satanic cabal.
Yeah.
And if you
makes perfect sense.
If you read Revelation 13:11 through 12, it says, the false prophet system gets its power from the dragon, the same dragon that's running the Antichrist system. So it gives, I'll just give you a pointed example. I was at a speaking engagement, right? I was a speaker at an event a couple weeks ago, and I asked the audience, this is all Christian people, and I asked them, just as a hook to get, I'd like to teach. So in the mindset of teaching, I want people to realize Satan has programmed us to look at actions. The Bible is a book of why. It's not a book of what. So, but we're programmed. Satan has tricked us to look at actions. So I asked the question, if there is when you get done today, you check your phone and your messages and you see that the president made an executive order that gasoline prices will be 99 cents a gallon forever. It'll never go above 99 cents a gallon. Is that good? Almost everybody raised their hand. I mean, that's complete BS.
It's terrible. Yes.
Yeah. So, but this is how deceived Christians are. We're not seeing that this is the world. Jesus said Satan is the prince of this world. If we're called out of this world, and my bigger series is called Escaping Babylon. So we're called out of this world, which means now we're representing the kingdom of heaven on this earth. Earth is not the same as world.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's another long answer to your question. But
no, that's good. It's good to have that conversation, as it says in I think it's Jeremiah, come let us reason together. I'll just take that little snippet. But in the Wycliffe Bible, I'm glad that you brought up the Geneva Bible. One of the things that I talk a lot on this show about is finding old books. And last night, no one will sleep better knowing this. I'm reading this booklet that I found. It's in English from French Canada, probably. Those northern colonies, the northern colonies get mentioned quite a bit in these books. And it's a compendium of books from 1873 and 1874. And I was reading this account of this brother and sister who had lost their parents. And my wife comes over, is like, "What are you doing, Michael?" And I said, "Look, I found this book from 1874. And I think she was kind of like, "Only you. Only you. Who else is going to find something like that?" Anyway, I did want to the Wycliffe Bible, Ephesians 3:11. The apostles asked Jesus, "How then shall we live?" But in Wycliffe's version of Ephesians 3:11, it says, "And do not," and kind of modernize it, "commune with or to unfruitful works of darkness," and it uses the word reprove, but rather reprove them. And then in brackets it has, "And do not share, do not take part in unfruitful works of darkness, but rather rebuke them." This really would challenge each of us who called Jesus Lord to consider our ways each and every day of, boy, am I being fruitful and multiplying? Am I participating in abundance? Or am I spending too much time focused on unfruitful works of darkness? And Jesus said that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and he came that we might have life and have it abundantly and full. And that actually, ladies and gentlemen, gives you that picture of what is light, what is darkness, stealing, killing, and destroying. And sloth and things like that. That's darkness, ladies and gentlemen. So may we walk in light while we have that light. Can you talk about how this experience connected you more, brought you together, or as some might happen, it's like being torn asunder almost because of tragedy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have a fancy answer for that, and other than just to say it's a work in progress. So all three of us are at different levels in this walk, and that creates, sometimes it's excellent, and sometimes we're not on the same page just because of how we perceive the different things that have happened so far.
Yes.
So that just is kind of the nature of it. Jessica has really dug into how the government is poisoning us with food. So that's been a real gift. Ever dig into that, and dentistry, and there's so many fingers of this that are negative. Cindy has dove into helping a disabled lady about 3 hours away that, again, through God's providence, we ended up helping her and not realizing that she was trapped in the state guardian system. And, so we worked on getting her transferred from a state guardian to Cindy as co-guardian with the lady's sister. And Cindy saved her life 3 times. This system is so corrupt. Mm-hmm. Most people, if they're not at least partially awake, couldn't handle what I know. And I did it. The book is written from a gentle perspective because I really wanted it to be shared. So once somebody gets a copy of it and reads it, I want them to share it with somebody who's not awake.
Right.
Because then we're making headway, right?
Yeah. Right.
If we are only preaching to the echo chamber, we're not making any headway.
Right. And, hearing about what your daughter Jessica is doing with food, and you mentioned the word dentistry, that made me think of Dr. Weston Price and Dr. Lumen Wong, just about their look into diet and teeth and other, even facial structure, and how it's just so connected to the, maybe we could go, well, not in this conversation, but you could look into how America changed from family farms to industrial farming. I can't remember which president that was under, but that's a whole other book in and of itself. So, Michael, I got to get you to stay on track. Because there's so many things that we could talk about, but I love it. Reading and learning is a wonderful thing for each of us, and it's how we bring light into dark places. Now, your component of that, shining the spotlight, is that your advocacy is deeply rooted in protecting the vulnerable, like you were describing what your wife Cindy was recently doing. How has standing up for Grace then expanded your heart to become a voice for other families who maybe they feel small, insignificant, helpless, and unheard in the face of these massive, we could use the word institutions, but we'll use the word beasts, these massive beasts?
What's happened is Cindy does a great job of reminding me where we came from. And where we came from is we were not awake. And so the term I use for that is programming. We were programmed. Both of us went through the public fool system. We were indoctrinated to trust the white coat, all these things.
Yes. Yeah. The
And
longer the coat, the better, don't you know?
so what's happened is our view is to be more open to the people who are caught. We just had a phone call with a gentleman this morning. He's in his 80s. His wife was captured in the system. She has dementia. She escaped from their house. The police picked her up, and one thing leads to another, and she's under state guardianship.
Wow.
So to have patience with that man and to gently walk him through what's going on, to let him know they are going to do their best to kill her. These are things, you have to gently walk through with somebody. So like when I was talking with Cindy before we got him on the call, we can go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in 10 seconds, right? And she said, well, you can't do that with him. I said, well, yeah, I understand. I'm going to gently bring him along. So we had about a 35-minute call with him this morning to give him some guidance as to what he can do to get his wife back.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you're captured in their system,
yeah,
it's not good. You really never want to ever have a state guardian.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're going to get into your book, but you had mentioned dementia, and of course, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's fits in there, multiple sclerosis, those ungodly things are there. I would encourage our listeners to go into our archives for 5 a.m. podcast and find the interview with Mark Burnett. And he's a man that developed a system, and he's got a website called My Brain Restore. We'll give you the links for that. But if you're struggling with that, or you have a family member like this gentleman, please check out Mark Burnett's conversation with me and look into his information, because it may save the life of someone in your family or somebody that you know. And that's what we want, to bring light and love. Now we get into the book and talk about a provocative title. And, one of the things in doing YouTube titles and descriptions and Spotify and Apple and all the usual suspects, we got to have that curiosity loop, they tell us. And what a question of, on the front cover of your book, is the government legally killing us? It was released this spring, immediately went to #1. When you sat down to write it, how did it feel to transform your years of that forensic research into a tool meant to safeguard other people's lives?
Yeah, it's interesting. Right after the trial, so I had been working on the larger series before the trial. I took roughly 3 months off plus the trial just to work with the legal team every day. And the larger series was Escaping Babylon. So the trial's over. I started getting back into the Escaping Babylon series, which is all based on, showing what's going on with Revelation 13 and then divorcing yourself from the beast systems. And God put on my heart, write down everything that you've learned about the medical industrial complex, which is about 4,000 hours of research. And so I thought, okay, I start writing, and it became a very long, what I thought was going to just be a long Substack that I would release over multiple weeks. And it was actually fairly easy to write because I have been writing a lot since Grace's death. So it was fairly easy to write. I probably had the entire thing written I started in mid-August, probably by mid-October it was written. And so then I sent it to an MD to make sure it was technically correct before I release it as a Substack. And she said, Scott, this is a book. So then it changed my perspective because, as a Substack article with people who are already following us, that's one perspective. But the perspective, so now, I spent a fair amount of time, but, about a month then, reformatting what I had written and doing some more about grace. It's funny because it's like the blinding flash of the obvious. When you're in it, you can't see some things. And
Yes.
I have a friend of mine who's a publisher. And so he read my manuscript. He said, well, this doesn't fit in my wheelhouse, but I'll help you. And he said, people are going to want to know about grace. And so I added a couple of chapters about grace in the book because, now it's a book. It isn't just a Substack.
Mm-hmm.
In Substack, the people already know about grace because they've been following me for 4 years, right?
Yes.
But in a book, you're getting to a new audience. And so that helped. And then, the process with, I hired a copy editor because I wanted this to not just be a good book. I want to be a great book that can be passed on. So, that process to get it to the finish line, it takes a long time. So March 10th is when it was released, and I had the book written in November. So it took it 4 months to get it across the finish line.
Yeah. Yeah. And good things take time. Ladies and gentlemen, as I've already mentioned, we're talking with Grace's father, Scott Schara. This is an important account of love. And so please share this with your friends and family. Get this message out there. And if you are one of those people on Substack and you like to read those articles, Scott, how can they find you on Substack?
Again, if you go to ouramazinggrace.net, that's the hub for everything. And in the upper right-hand corner, there's a link that says subscribe to our newsletter, and that's how you can subscribe. And I really appreciate when people subscribe because we get a lot of feedback through that, because that's the method I use to release things. We have a Rumble channel too, but even the Rumble things that I do, I have my own podcast called Deprogramming with Grace's Dad, but I always release those via Substack. So that's where, the main following is on Substack.
Right. Okay. Good to know. And now back to the book. It uncovers some very difficult realities about our institutional systems. And so then for a parent or spouse who feels overwhelmed by fear, let's say fear from reading your book or what they're discovering, and they thought everything was summer carnivals and fun indulgences, how does the truth in your book actually provide a path to peace and control?
Well, that's really the question that matters the most. So the first thing before you can have a path to peace and control, you have to realize that you weren't on that path before. That's, the 90% of the book is written from that perspective. What is the current system that we've been sold, that we've been programmed to believe in? So once you see, oh my gosh, this system is designed to kill us. We are the enemy. Okay, so now you are at the beginning point of saying, okay, what can I do? Okay, so that's very important. So then I spend a fair amount of time going through what can we do, and I'm going to boil it down very simply here. A lady, so that same conference I spoke at, I hadn't seen her in 15 years. She came to see me speak, and she said, "Scott, how are you going to take 4,000 hours of research that you boil down to a book, and then how are you going to give a 45-minute presentation? It doesn't make any sense. How are you able to do that? Why don't you just tell the people, go buy the book?" So what I'm going to take is a whole section of the book and summarize it in a minute. So again, using the parallel of Revelation 13. I always look at Revelation 13 as the physical, the Antichrist system, and the spiritual, the false prophet system. So physically, what can we do? And the answer is get comfortable dying. Because once you're comfortable with death, they can't control you anymore. And so how do you get comfortable with death? You believe in the fact that God came to this earth. He suffered. He was crucified, died, and he was buried and rose again on the third day in fulfillment of the scriptures, that whoever believes in him will have eternal life. So once you have that under your belt, okay, when you experience fear, all of us are going to experience fear. You go 180 degrees and you say, okay, what's the worst case scenario? This is my last day on earth. And that's the best day of your life, right? So, so get comfortable dying. That's the physical piece. And then the spiritual piece is once you come to grips with how we have been duped. So then we participate. We end up partaking in these antichrist systems. So we were duped. God has a different perspective of when we're deceived versus when we're not deceived. So we acknowledge we were deceived, and then we repent for our participation, and then we go. So repenting means you turn the other way. So now we get out of Babylon. And so what does that look like? Once you see these things, it becomes some practical things. So how do you get out? The most obvious is drop your medical insurance. So to the extent you have medical insurance, you just became married to the system that's designed to kill you. Get a medical professional who is not in the system, a cash pay medical professional. Paperwork will never save your life, but in their system, So if you have to go into their system, so participate in God's system. But if you have to go to their system, so, you're in a car accident, whatever, you end up in the emergency room, make sure your paperwork is prepared ahead of time. So, a power of attorney for healthcare, and your power of attorney should be somebody who's awake that can be in the leadership role if you ever get into that situation. And it's critical to that they understand what advocacy means. And I'm going to give you a pointed example in Grace's case. If I would have known what I know now, Grace, of course, would be alive today because we had never taken her to the hospital. Fear got me to take her to the hospital. But second of all, assuming it wasn't fear that got her into the hospital, she'd be alive today because I know how to advocate today. I did not know how to advocate back then. And the example I'll give you, Michael, is the key perspective first before the example is the advocate must be in the leadership role. We are programmed to become subservient to the white coat when we get into these situations. The white coat should be subservient to you. You are hiring them as a vendor. Okay, so when you realize you're in the leadership position, you're hiring them as a vendor, now you're in the proper perspective. So the best example I can give you that people will be familiar with is if you went through the public school system, at some time you had a substitute teacher. And so there were substitute teachers who you had a high degree of respect for, and there's ones who you didn't. And the difference was the ones who got control of the classroom in the first 5 minutes were ones you respected because they were in the leadership role. And that's the perspective that the advocate has to come in with. So what would that have looked like in Grace's case? I would have said, okay, I'm willing to admit Grace to the hospital. I want to talk with the medical team, let them know that I'm in the leadership position, which means you cannot do any orders and implement any orders without my express written permission with everything. So not one thing are you able to do to Grace without my express written permission. Can you agree with this? And if they can't, okay, end of story. We're moving on to hospital B.
Yeah, right. And one of the things you write about is the inversion of ethics in modern systems. So instead of looking at this through a political lens, how can families use discernment and spiritual alignment to stay anchored when the world begins to feel upside down to them?
So I gave a partial answer to that with the idea of advocacy. So once you're in the leadership role, when you feel pressure, they will pressure you. I mean, that is what their job is. And so every time you feel the pressure, that is your signal from God to go opposite. Say, no, I'm not making any decisions based on emotion or pressure. I am going to listen to you. I'm going to pray about it. I'm going to do my own research, and then I'm going to give you consent afterward. What's interesting, I reveal this in the book, the idea of people are really on this idea of informed consent. And remember earlier in our conversation, I mentioned about dialectics.
Yes.
This is a dialectic trap, and it's easily proven because you think, well, yeah, doctors have to give informed consent. Well, legally, they already have to. And I'm grabbing my sheet of paper with it. So this is from their own medical ethics document. So this is the American Medical Association Code of Medical Ethics, section 2.1.1, titled Informed Consent. So these doctors are already required to give informed consent. So the people preaching, we got to have informed consent, what I'm bluntly telling you is that doesn't matter. And so even if the doctor is following their own rules with informed consent, I'm going to prove to you it doesn't matter. So here I'm going to read just the first sentence, and then I'm going to reread it, emphasizing why I say this. So it says, informed consent to medical treatment is fundamental in both ethics and law. Patients have the right to receive information and ask questions about recommended treatment so they can make well-considered decisions about care. So that sounds right. The reality is it's wrong. And here's why. I'm going to read it again. Informed consent to medical treatment is fundamental in both ethics and law. No problem with that sentence. Patients have the right to receive information and ask questions. No problem. Here's the trick language. About recommended treatments. About recommended treatments so they can make well-considered decisions about care. If you are in their system, they can only make recommendations that follow the standard of care dictated by the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is a bureaucracy controlled by the government. You think, well, I'm not on Medicare and Medicaid. It doesn't matter. Medicare, the CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, controls this whole model through reimbursement strategies. And it's critical that people understand, just because the doctor isn't, some doctors are arrogant, rude. That's easy to spot. But what if they're nice? Okay. Well, just because they're nice doesn't mean they're telling you the truth. You have to get true informed consent. They'd have to give you the information about things that are not dictated by CMS. So, and that's why you got to do your own research. That's why you need a medical professional who's outside the system, whose license is not controlled by CMS.
Right. So we're getting close to wrapping up. We've got a little bit of time left. What then in America is the number one cause of death?
Yeah. Well, so the book proves that medical murder is the number one cause of death, hands down. And it also proves that it's by design. So that should shock people, but I prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt in the book. And I was just talking with my wife about this morning, because she said, how can you be so confident? It's because I've studied it. So the number one cause of death in America today is heart disease. What the cause of death isn't, the person got heart disease for a reason, which is likely, because they're poisoning our air, our food, our water, all of that. But regardless, it's the cure. So the cure for heart disease is the statin. The statin causes dementia. And Ezekiel Emanuel, who's the chief architect of Obamacare, said that people with dementia don't deserve medical care because they're non-contributing members of society. So the cure for heart disease, the standard of care, it's not a cure. The standard of care for heart disease is the cause of death. The standard of care for cancer's number 2 was 600,000. So 700,000 deaths a year, heart disease, 600,000 cancer. The standard of care for cancer is chemo. Chemo, if you survive 5 years and 1 day as a chemo patient, you are in a class of 2.1%. 97.9% of your classmates died. And then the third leading cause of death is medical malpractice at 400,000. So you add those three up, 700,000 plus 600,000 plus 400,000 is 1.7 million. 1.7 million divided by 12 is 142,000 new medical murders every single month. There's 2.6 million deaths in America. So just those top three account for 61% of all deaths in America. That's why I say medical murder is the number one cause of death. Period. There's no question about it.
That could be seen as a harsh pill to swallow and a harsh reality to accept. Yeah, we'll move on from there. If Grace could see the movement, the book, and the lives being shielded today because of her name, what do you think she would say to you?
Yeah, that's interesting, because Jessica said this after my very first interview on Newsmax, which was 4.5 years ago. And I think it was spot on with what Grace would say, just because of her personality. She would say, "Way to go, earthly dad."
Yes. Well, and she was someone living with a much greater revelation of what was going on around all of us. And, as we're talking, I think of that Albert Pike quote of this is a Michael Fide translation of it, of when the people need a hero, we will provide one.
Yeah, that's certainly that's the false prophet nature of Albert Pike's work. That's for sure.
Yes. It's so appropriate, and it's great that you bring in that false prophet side of it, because they don't want you having the real goods. You might have some commentary on this statement of the one who causes the problem provides the cure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we see this pattern over and over. That's the Hegelian dialectic pattern, and once you see it, it's mind blowing. We see COVID is the easy one because we just got through it, right? So the COVID dialectics, so first, even calling it COVID is a deception, because they're claiming it's a virus. No, it was a poison. It was a poison instituted by our own government. It was not a lab leak. These are all deceptions they want us to believe in. But so just go with this whole pandemic idea. So they create a pandemic, which always causes fear. So the pre-designed solution is the bioweapon jab. 9/11, same thing. So they create this psyop with 9/11, fear. What was their goal? The Patriot Act. So they could have us agree. They have to get us to agree. So we agree with 24/7 monitoring. If you zoom out a bit, as I've been studying, I'm really working on this escaping Babylon thing. And, there's a lot of people who are focused on, we got to get back to the Constitution. And I'm proving that the Constitution is another dialectic. And I introduced it a few weeks back by explaining that the Great Depression was another Hegelian dialectic. So they caused the Great Depression. So then there's panic and chaos. And so then the people agreed, they voted in by a landslide, the New Deal. Okay, well then on March 9th of 1933, there was a bait and switch. I'm calling it the War Powers Act because I don't have that right in front of me. But the War Powers Act essentially said previously that only foreigners could be enemies of the United States. Well, that got switched with the New Deal and said, no, the citizens are now the enemy. And so they implemented fees licensing, and turning in your gold, and the Constitution was suspended. So in the event of a war, in the War Powers Act, the Constitution is suspended. So even if we had a legitimate Constitution, which, I'm not going to go on that rabbit trail here, it was suspended on March 9th of 1933, and it's suspended today. That has never been retracted. So it's beyond belief what these minions have done to get us into their trap.
Yeah. So speaking of traps, someone might be listening right now and they feel trapped, maybe in a valley of grief or debt or facing a seemingly unbeatable giant. What is the ultimate message of hope and victory you would want to leave them with?
Yeah. So I'm going to take you back to October 9th of 2018. Cindy called me. She found our son, Travis. He died by suicide, and I was 2 hours away at a client. So I immediately got into the vehicle, started driving. I called my best friend, and he said, Scott, you're going to have to walk through this. So the message of hope is you got to walk through these things. God is sovereign. He has a purpose for everything. He doesn't make any mistakes, and it's our job to walk through it. So, it's not, I know people want a silver bullet. There's no silver bullet. Every day it's a struggle. You got to walk through it. God's purpose is different than our purpose.
Yes. And so then if someone is picking up what you're laying down there and they're saying, how do I find this help or this peace to go through something? Where do they start looking? It's obviously a spiritual solution for a physical issue, but it's also a spiritual issue all at the same time.
God, what does God want? He wants us to trust him. As Grace would say, God's got this, Dad. It's where does the anxiety and the frustration, all that stuff, where does it all come from? It all comes from, we don't believe that. We don't trust God. That's the bottom line. If we trust him and know that he's got this, we have a good Father. I can say that confidently. And yet the times when I go through the valleys, I think, what's going on here? God, where, are you asleep, yes. God? What's going on? God is never sleeping. I was listening to Elizabeth Elliot yesterday, and she was asked by a lady to pray that their family get a new living arrangement. And Elizabeth Elliot told her, well, God does not want that for you right now. So you think, what? It was just like refreshing. I enjoyed listening to her. And she just has a gentle way of showing me I'm a dummy. Anyway, so the lady said, well, how do you know that? And she said, well, because he would have already provided it if he wanted it now. So, so God wants us to walk through these things.
Yes. Yes, amen to that, Scott. Your journey, Scott, is a profound reminder that while we cannot control the tragedies, maybe we can't control our living arrangements, as you just shared, and these things land on our doorstep. We might not like the doorstep. We cannot always control the tragedies that land at our doorstep. We absolutely control whether they break us, weigh us down, they force us into a different state of mind. Thank you so much for turning your pain into a shield for so many others.
Well, thanks for having me. God bless you, Michael. This was really a nice discussion. I appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, as you're listening today, transformation might be said it begins with awareness that victory over fear starts with taking action. And I highly encourage you to equip your family with Scott's research and pick up The Story of Grace. You can get that #1 best-selling book, Is the Government Legally Killing Us, right now. And you can find that at book.ouramazinggrace.net. We will have that in the show notes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to the 5 a.m. podcast. When we seize our days, we seize our future. Thank you for your support over at buymeacoffee.com/5am podcast. And please get out there and enjoy those beautiful sunrises, sunsets, and all the wonderful adventures in between. I'm your host, Michael Clausen, and we will see you on the next 5 a.m. podcast. Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com.